This lecture is being brought to you in part by the generous gifts of these sponsors.
How y'all doing? All right. So hopefully none of you came to Ocala because it's a very similar speech I did about a year ago. Thanks for the introduction, Ken. Very thorough. It pretty much gets rid of my first slide, which is about who I am. And I think the Ocala lecture might have been a little longer, so I have a few more slides in here. That one. Basically, I dropped out of high school, joined the Navy to become a SEAL. Wanted to be a tough guy, and went through SEAL training, spent some time in the SEAL teams, got out, went to college, went back in to go to the military's medical school with the intent of being an orthopedic surgeon. And this whole internship fiasco, you talk about that over drinks. You have to buy the drink, though. And then, figured I better go back to the SEAL team, so I did this residency. This is submarine rescue. Actually, a really great job. Went over to the West Coast SEAL teams. As Ken said, the East Coast did have a sports medicine facility. But like any government project, it took a long time for things to actually come to fruition. And so although this had been planned for 10 years, it wasn't my initiative. I just got there at a very fortuitous time to be put in charge of building it and hiring all the guys who have now since left and gone back to professional sports and so forth, because the military is so indecisive and wishy-washy and all that stuff. But I digress. And it was actually in this job with Naval Special Warfare Group 1. SEALs are just like professional athletes. The worst thing you can do is put them on the sideline. So when they go see their doctor for their routine checkup that's mandated by the military, they're going to see the enemy, right? And so they go in there and they say, how you doing? Great, everything's great, 100%, like the Monty Python thing, it's like you have an arm cut off and be like, I'm great, 100%, like just turn so you can't notice that. And they won't tell the doctors anything. Everything's fine. And because I had been a SEAL, and I'd been a SEAL recently. More importantly, I'd been a SEAL recently enough for there to be plenty of SEALs at the SEAL teams that I had been a SEAL with, that I'd gone through training with, I'd done platoons with, I'd done deployments with. And I had a fairly good reputation as a SEAL, which is the other really important aspect. And so they'd come in my office, they'd close the door, and they'd say, hey, let me tell you what's really going on. They'd listed off this list of symptoms that we'll kind of touch on today. But about 100 guys came in and told me the same story within 30 days. And I had no idea. I was like, I don't have a clue, no place to start, because they didn't have any disease. They just weren't performing to where they should be, which is why I do what I do now, is because of that chance occurrence. That's why I help people optimize health. I don't diagnose and treat disease. I take people who are relatively healthy or maybe suboptimal in some areas, and we creep them up, or I take guys who are performing at the top and we get them 1% better. Much more enjoyable for me, but that's me. And they got me boxed in on this little stage. I feel a little defensive. So then I did a year of concierge medicine and realized that just wasn't my gig, dealing with really entitled people. Concierge medicine basically means you pay me a lump sum of money and then you have access to me more frequently, but a lot of people think that I am now their personal servant and they call me 24 hours a day, and it wasn't a business model I enjoyed. I went from guys trying to hide gunshot wounds from their doctors to people calling me at 2 a.m. telling me that their 25-year-old son has kind of a sore throat. Okay. They sell Tylenol in the Hamptons, don't they? So, okay. So that was that. So this is basically how I look at health. I look at it as 4 different pillars. Everything's completely intertwined. Everything affects everything, just like the whole rest of the world, right? The whole idea of the butterfly's wing flapping, affecting whatever. I forget how that's supposed to go. I told you I'm a high school dropout. But I do. nutrition, exercise, sleep, and stress. Obviously, I get hired most often to talk about sleep when I'm presenting. When I work with clients or when I work with corporations or teams, I usually kind of do all of that. And I try really hard not to step on the toe of their nutritionist. So I always like to have my goals laid out so you guys can anticipate what I'm trying to get you to think about. And basically, I mean, I don't need to read it to you, I just want you guys to consider the possibility that sleep is more important than you currently think it is. That's a better summary of that, okay? And if I can convince you that possibility, then I would ask that you continue to educate yourself, and I give resources at the end for you guys to do that. So, this is where I start stumping everybody. Everybody's going to get real uncomfortable. Somebody give me a definition of sleep. Well, hold on. I always have to check first. Honest question, has anybody here slept before? Okay. All right, well then go ahead. Somebody give me a definition. I'm sorry?
Unconscious.
Unconscious. Okay. I have a story about that. Goes along with the OB-GYN thing. What was that?
Multi-staged.
Multi-stage. Okay. I don't do this to make anybody feel foolish. I do this to point out what I think is completely fascinating fact. That's something that every one of us do almost every single day of our lives, we can't define. Now, obviously, words are a poor approximation for a lot of things, but that seems like we should be able to come up with something decent, and nobody can. But to make you feel any better, doctors don't agree with it either. Researchers that study sleep do not agree on the definition of sleep. So I'm going to give you the correct definition, which is mine. Actually, there's 3 parts to this definition, and I have no idea what that means time-wise. 6:45 I need to be done with for 6:50 I'm done. All right, so 6:40-ish we'll do questions. Okay.
No, 7.
Oh, 7. Okay, 6:50. All right, so I have 40 minutes. We got plenty of time. Okay. So the first 2 parts of this definition come from a guy named William Dement, who is the grandfather of sleep medicine. He essentially invented sleep medicine. And he's the guy who first observed the rapid eye movement. That was the launch, right? That was the first thing anybody knew about sleep. Is look, their eyes move a lot when they're asleep. So they put a doctor name on it. That's job security, right? We take simple things, we put a crazy name on it so nobody knows what the hell that means. And then they have to think, then they think we're smart because we described it with a fancy word. Okay, so he says a barrier exists between you and your environment. So to your point, sir, if I had you volunteer to come up on stage and I had a little bat down here and you fell off the stage, what's your name?
Joe.
Joe. Who here would say Joe fell asleep? Joe's unconscious. We all agree. Joe's not sleeping because of the second part. You can be awakened, right? So you have to be able to get past that barrier in your environment. So that barrier changes. Probably most of you, hopefully not today, but probably most of you have had the experience of sitting in a rather boring place and kind of, a classroom or whatever, and you kind of doze off. You're asleep, right? We would all agree, even though we can't define sleep, we would all agree that that's sleep. And then, whatever, a pencil drops, and that's enough to wake you up, right? A little click, a little something, that's enough to wake you up. But if you're at home, especially men, if you're at home snoring in your bed, and a car crashes into the front of your house, you might not wake up. So that barrier can be high, it can be low, right? So it depends on the environment, but that's basically it. You're not consciously aware, and this is important when we get to the sleep hygiene point, because this is really all you have to know for sleep hygiene. You're not consciously aware of your environment. There's a barrier between you and your environment. That's all that means, okay? You can be awakened. That was William Dement's pretty good definition, okay? And then I improved it by saying that there are predictable, that should say neuronal patterns. So when we put all these, anybody here ever had a sleep study? Most ridiculous experience of your life, right? Like 72 wires on your head, strapped around here, whole socks on your finger, tape everywhere, plastic bed, no sleep. I'm here because I have a sleep problem. You know, it's like, well, let's put them in the worst environment ever to sleep and see how they do. But there has to be predictable neuronal patterns. The reason I say that is for the example of Joe. So if Joe were up here and I hit him with a bat and he fell to the ground, he would be unconscious. But his brain waves, if we summed them all, would just kind of be flat, right? There wouldn't be like certain regions of his brain firing in it. Like it would just kind of be like a mishmash of like crazy, uninterpretable results. When you sleep, we expect certain things to happen, and we'll cover that. And the reason I belabor this point is because if you use sleep aids, the predictable neuronal pattern goes away, or at least gets affected. It may not go away completely, but we'll talk about a little bit more about that later. So that's my definition. Let's start this off with how we evolved to sleep. Okay, you might want to get your pens out. This is complex stuff. When the sun went down, now, honestly, they didn't have a bed, right? So you went to ground or rock or whatever. And then when the sun came up, you got up. Realizing what a completely inept species we are. I mean, can you really picture us fending for ourselves, and fighting off other carnivores or other omnivores? We're pretty pathetic. I mean, as a species, come on, like a really angry raccoon would scare the hell out of me. I'd be like, no, I'm not going to deal with that. Was that like a spear or something, right? So it was in our best interest to not be running around during the night, right? So it kind of makes sense that we would evolve that way. And of course, that's complete conjecture. I have no idea if that's true or not, but it's a logical argument. So let's go with it. And then, you repeat it every time the sun goes up and down, which is most days. And interestingly enough, just like 120 years ago, pre-light bulb, average person spent 10 hours a night in bed, okay? I don't think I cover this later in the lecture. Anybody have a clue, a guess, what the average American spends in bed right now? Spends in bed. 6.2 hours in bed. So how much sleep are you getting out of that? Like 5-ish, 5:45, 5:50, right? Okay. Now, if you use the sun the way you evolved, the way every animal, all life on this planet uses the sun to regulate its biological rhythms, okay? We are no exception. If you use that, this is what it looks like. This curve happens, and this is not at all accurate, okay? This is a cartoon to represent a concept. But we have stress hormones. You've all heard of stress hormones, and you've all heard that cortisol is a major stress hormone. So I say this is the circadian release of cortisol, but if there's any doctors in the room who think I'm an idiot, I actually know better. I'm just saying this is for purely explaining. Okay, so cortisol way down here is what we call stages 3 and 4 sleep. Deep sleep, slow wave sleep. At the very bottom, okay, we're going to talk about what's happening down there. If you were at fight or flight, everybody's heard of that, right? That's maximum stress hormones. You're up here somewhere, okay? So your cortisol goes down when you first go to sleep. It goes down, 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 and then lots of good stuff happens here. We'll talk about that. It starts coming back up, and it actually wakes you up, okay? And it's in train with the sun, and it will actually wake you up a little bit before the sun comes up, oftentimes, if you're really in train with your environment. And then you have a peak like around 9 a.m. It has to do with lots of variables. We'll get into that in a little bit. And this nice little curve happens, and your body's happy, and all sorts of metabolic functions intertwine like, cogs in a machine, and your body works well. You screw this up, you do shift work, and it's like, a lot of people are like, okay, right here, like a police officer is like, well, here I'm starting my shift, right? I mean, that seemed like a good idea. I mean, or obviously something we didn't evolve to do, since evolution takes, very protracted amount of time. We didn't evolve to be able to fly 12 time zones in a day, right? I mean, my wife's Australian. I go to Australia all the time. It's like the opposite side of the world in a single day. Like, how long is that going to take for my body to get in track with this? 12 to 24 days is the answer, but okay. Okay, so this is how the game works. Okay, I'm going to cover this briefly, and then I go a little more elaborate in the next one. But this is again a cartoon. It's not super accurate, but in the back of our eye there are these ganglia, which just means a bunch of nerves all combined together. They have nothing to do with vision. And a lot of blind people have these still. So a lot of blind people have normal circadian rhythms if they're the right photo periods. And then what they sense is blue light. So if you've heard all of these stories about, blue light on your phone, blue light on your iPad, wearing blue blocking glasses, all this stuff, you guys remember, most people in this room are old enough to remember the blue blocker sunglasses, those horrible commercials, right? And they're like big old lady, bay fishermen, or like bass fishermen, like wrap around. They were successfully sued because little old ladies were crashing their cars. Because they were falling asleep because all the blue light had been out of their eyes for 3 or 4 hours. So you drop this blue light out of the eyes. It goes back here. This is something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Again, that's one of those job security words. SCN, master clock. Basically, this coordinates everything else that's going to happen to get our brain ready to sleep. This long circuitous pathway comes up, and then eventually this gland in the back of our brain called the pineal gland secretes what we've all in this room heard of, melatonin. And melatonin helps to lower stress hormones, okay? Especially in the brain, but all over the body. Your gut neurons do the same thing, okay? So this is some repeat and a little elaboration. So the blue light decreases. It stimulates the pineal gland, releases melatonin. Melatonin then goes down and decreases adrenal functions. The adrenal glands sit right here on top of your kidneys. They're called adrenal glands because they secrete adrenaline, right? Man, you guys are smart. I just learned that last week. Body temperature decreases largely because of thyroid function, but also stress hormones. Heart rate decreases for multiple reasons. Blood pressure decreases. A neuropeptide called GABA gets increased production in this region of the brain here, and it goes and it blunts that neocortex and makes you less aware of your environment. That's the function of GABA. Hold on to that idea, right? Blue light coming in your eyes, and GABA shutting down your awareness of your environment. Think of those two things, okay? Keep those in mind. Your blood sugar drops, again, for various metabolic reasons. And then your immune system increases, and a lot of good stuff happens, okay? And we're going to talk about what some of that good stuff is. But this is actually, when you get into deep sleep, it is actually the most restorative time of your entire life, okay? And in fact, I'll make the case that this is the only time you get better at anything, is when you're sleeping, okay? I know that doesn't make a lot of sense intuitively, but hopefully I'll convince you of that. Okay, so what happens on Thanksgiving? We eat turkey and we feel like sleeping, and why do we feel like sleeping? Everybody at once, tryptophan, and we all know that, right? Because turkey has more tryptophan than anything in the world, right? Not at all. Pretty average as far as meat goes. All meat has tryptophan in it, but what meat do we overeat the most, right? Like, we didn't even try to come up with a tradition for Thanksgiving. Just like, how about we just overeat? Like, that's what we do for Thanksgiving. Just let's overeat. Okay. Overeat turkey. Okay, let's do that. So you get a big dose of tryptophan. Tryptophan then becomes something called 5-hydroxytryptophan. You may or may not have seen this in health food stores. It's a supplement on the shelf, usually sold as a calming agent because 5-HTP becomes serotonin. Anybody hear of serotonin before? What do we call people with low serotonin? Depressed. right? So a lot of mood disorders have to do with serotonin levels, so 5-HTP. If you're deficient in that, we can make more serotonin. Maybe that'll help. That's the, GNC version of healthcare. Melatonin then lowers adrenal function, as we talked about. And then for number 2 to become number 3, it requires both vitamin D3 and magnesium. Vitamin D3, of course, is not a vitamin, it's a hormone. Magnesium is probably the most common mineral deficiency across our culture, okay? So this is basically what I figured out to help the seals sleep. And I really initially thought with this whole litany of symptoms that they were telling me that they were all going to have adrenal fatigue. And I treated adrenal fatigue for a while and had some success and some not success. And, I told you I'm not super smart. So around the 100th guy who told me he uses Ambien every single night to go to sleep, I thought, I wonder if that has anything to do with all these symptoms. And I go back through every single record, and I've written down Ambien for every single patient using Ambien to go to sleep. And if you know any SEALs, 1 is good, 2's better, 3's got to be fantastic. And then you have to have a couple of cocktails because you're a man, aren't you? And so, do that, go to sleep for 4 hours, and I make the case you don't actually sleep, and then get up early and go work out really hard, so you'll be really tired the next night, and you'll be able to sleep. I'll say, how long have you been trying that? 5 years. I'm like, keep it up. It's going to work. Tonight's the night. Okay, so this is the sleep architecture I talked about. This is my third part of the definition. So when we take all these crazy leads from your brain, we look at all your neuronal patterns, right? All those leads are measuring is like where big bursts of nerves are firing together. And we can see like these squiggly waves, and we can combine all those into one picture. And then we take your heart rate and your heart rate variability and your respiratory rate and your pulse ox and like all these things. And we come up with this, something called a hypnogram. And what this does is it basically says, I'm not going to be tall enough if I get down to the point. I know the people in the back room, sorry people in the back room, you can't see the pointer, but we start up here in the top left-hand corner with awake. You get into bed awake, all right? You don't actually do REM, that's just representing REM. You get on to stage 1 sleep. Stage 1 sleep is that kind of sleep where you're still fairly aware of what's going on around you, but you're not 100% there. It's like, it's like you're kind of halfway in between, kind of that warm, fuzzy feeling. You're falling asleep, you're not quite normal, but you're still aware. Then you go down to stage 2 sleep, which is proper sleep, okay? There are some things that happen in stage 2 sleep, but they're mainly preparatory for the other phases of sleep. It's not like a whole lot of restorative things going. It's initiation of restorative things. And then you get down in the stages 3 and 4 of sleep. And if you look at, this is meant to be an 8-hour sleep night. If you look at 4 hours, this half of the night is dominated by deep sleep. This half of the night is dominated by REM sleep, okay? The morning hours are REM sleep. You don't remember dreams that you're having in deep sleep. So if you wake up here, you don't remember your dreams. If you wake up in REM, you remember your dreams, okay? So you're obviously much more likely, if you sleep enough, to wake up dreaming. And that's one of the things that when people start sleeping better, they'll say, I'm having all these really crazy dreams now, and I haven't. I'm like, well, it's just because you're getting more sleep and you're doing what should be happening. But these are really important phases right here. So this is the most important thing, and this is what was causing almost every symptom that the SEALs were having. Is stages 3 and 4 sleep. If you use alcohol to sleep, stages 3 and 4 sleep do not happen. Okay? If you use sleep drugs, it diminishes how much it happens. So you use those two together, you're screwed. There's almost no deep sleep happening. Stage 3 and 4 sleep, as I told you, is the most restorative part of your day, right? That's when you're secreting almost all the testosterone that you're going to secrete, almost all the growth hormone that you're going to secrete. Your inflammation is the lowest, but your immune system is the highest, fighting off, bacteria, parasites, viruses. You're fixing whatever strained tendons, ligaments, muscles, all that type of stuff. That's all happening. You're also, during stages 3 and 4 of sleep, flushing out the neurotoxins in your brain, astrocytes in your brain, and there's some cells, they all kind of constrict, they open up some pathways, you flush a bunch of stuff out of your brain, allowing your brain to also start repairing itself. And then REM sleep is kind of the same thing happening for the brain. So during REM sleep, the brain is still restoring. There's more restorative stuff in the brain still happening here, but during REM sleep, the brain is consolidating information, right? So it's taking what you learned today and it's putting it in the right file so that you can compare it with what you already know, right? It's taking a new skill that you've learned and it's rehearsing it, literally rehearsing it. So if you learned how to swing a golf club, that's being rehearsed during REM sleep, okay? If you sleep in between practice sessions, you get better, right? Even if it's just a nap. You can train in the morning, take a nap, come back after that, you'll be better than you left the morning. And then go home and go to sleep, and then you wake up, you'll be better than you left that day. Okay, that's when we get better. You can do this with anything, and we'll talk about that in a second. So this is the key. This is why I added that third component to the definition. Because if this isn't true, then it's not really sleep. If it doesn't look like this, it's something else, okay? All right, so what sorts of stuff happens? Sleep improves declarative and procedural memory. Basically just means all memory. I can tell you my name, I can tell you where I live, I can tell you some facts about sleep. Procedural memory, I can tell you how to, dismantle a gun or do surgery or whatever. Sleep decreases inflammation. Chronic inflammation is a huge problem in America, largely to do with diet, largely to do with lifestyle, but also to do with aging. Sleep improves healing, as we just talked about, restores hormones, neurotransmitters, neuromodulators. I just call them all hormones because they do the same thing. And, medicine likes to divide stuff up into arbitrary categories that don't exist. Sleep improves body composition. I'll talk to you specifically about what that means, but it's basic, or I'll give you some data on that, but it basically means your fat to muscle ratio, okay? And I'll talk about why that happens. Sleep improves reaction time, cognitive speed, working memory, strength, agility, balance, vision, endurance, and anything else you can think of. Any metric that you use to say, am I doing well? Am I good? Am I successful? Am I optimal? Any metric is affected by sleep, okay? Mood, communication, affection. I'll do the couple studies now. So there was a study done where this bit of information comes from. Very, very intriguing study in my mind, at least. And they took couples, monogamous, either long-term or married couples, and they would sleep deprive one of them. And by sleep restriction, I should say, sleep restriction in sleep medicine, we mean that we take away about 2 hours of sleep. So we let them sleep 6 hours instead of 8 hours. Rough ballpark, okay? So you sleep deprive or sleep restrict one partner. And then the next day, that couple gets a free pass to go whatever they do, have as much fun as they want, whatever they feel like doing, and the researchers take care of their entire life. They pick their kids up from school, they walk their dog, they whatever, like no problems, like everything's taken care of you, completely stress-free. They spend the whole day together, and then at the end of the day, the really cool part comes where they get put into separate rooms, and they get to evaluate the other and say, how was your husband today? How was your wife today? What did you think about him? Like, did anything stand out? Doesn't matter which one you sleep deprive, they will both say that the other one wasn't quite there. He was okay, like we had some fun, but he wasn't like really attentive like he often is, or wasn't really communicative. Vice versa. He'll say the same thing about his wife, even though he's the sleep deprived one. And if you flip that around, it happens again. Anybody see a pattern as to how that could affect relationships? I mean, that's pretty damn obvious. I mean, I'm no doctor. Oh, I am a doctor, actually. And sleep decreases errors. I have a slide for that. So the question always comes up, how much sleep do I actually need? A lot of people say, well, as I get older, I don't feel like I need as much sleep. But basically, over 18 years old, you fall into this category. I don't care if you're 99 years old or 18, probably 18, you probably are maybe a little deeper in here. This is actually the range. When I met my mother-in-law, she was 84, she was sleeping 4 hours a night. I didn't give her any drugs, I just worked with her on her sleep, and she sleeps 8 hours a night now. Like, we didn't do anything other than what I'm talking to you guys about. Okay. Now let's talk about our children. Anybody here have a teenager? Well, Like, a lot of you look older than teenage kids, but you've had teenagers, right? Okay. All right, so this is really scary. So this fairly big green area is 4 to 5 hours of sleep. This is an adolescent. And what's going on while they're asleep? Everything. Their brain is growing. Like the information they're supposed to be learning at school, they're actually learning. They're actually consolidating. They're actually filing away. They're actually making it useful. The sport they're learning, that's when it's happening. Repairing their bodies, that's when it's happening. All right, so that's a pretty big area. 6 to 7 hours. Remember I told you, go back one slide, 8.5 to 9.25 hours, okay? This entire group is 6 to 7 hours, and then this little slither is 8 hours or more. 1%. 1% of school-age children, adolescent school-age children, get enough sleep. And what happens when they don't get as much sleep? Well, of course, this is too complicated to give cause and effect, but we can give correlation data, and here's the correlation. You sleep under 5 hours, you're probably going to have about a 3.0 GPA on average. 5 to 6 hours makes you a little bit better. 7 or more hours, it doesn't matter how intelligent you are, how good your parents are, how much money you have, what schools you go to, this holds true. You give kids enough sleep, they do better in school. That's kind of shocking, isn't it? I mean, who would have ever thought that? I mean, it's like if you feed your kids Play-Doh versus food, they actually perform better. I mean, who would have thought? This was a really interesting study. I wish I could go into this one. They took a bunch of private schools. They pushed the start time back later. And they measured it. The public schools won't get on board with this. There's been a lobbying group in DC for 20 years trying to get to start school later. And I don't have time to tell you that story, but I find it really fascinating. But basically, the less sleep you get. These were it was over 18 months, and 21 months, and this was high school and I think a few private colleges. But you can see the injury rate. Like that's a pretty damn big injury. We're 74% chance of injury if you're sleeping within 21 months, right? Less than 2 years, you have a 74% chance of injury. Just because you aren't sleeping as much, and you keep chasing that down, you get to where you should be sleeping, and you're down to like an 18% chance. Now, my hypothesis about this, everybody always pulls this out. Well, Kirk, what about the 5-hour guys? They're doing better than these guys, so maybe it's like 5 and then 8's your next best option. My hypothesis is that these kids didn't go to as many practices and probably didn't feel like participating as much, and probably skipped school and didn't really try and that kind of stuff. That's my guess. All right, so when we don't get enough sleep, we don't release growth hormone or testosterone in adequate supplies. Okay, so shout it out. Everybody in the room knows it. Dominant male sex hormone. Dominant female sex hormone. Testosterone, okay? Women, it's the way we do the numbers on the lab. It makes it look like you have this crazy amount of estrogen. Women have 10 times more estrogen, or 10 times more testosterone than they do estrogen, okay? All of the anabolic effects in a woman's body is done by growth hormone and testosterone, just like in men's. The difference is men have 10 times as much testosterone as women, which is why men tend to have larger muscles and thicker bones and grow taller, right? If you aren't sleeping well, you decrease the amount of total testosterone you have. Actually, when women first start slowing, their ovaries first start slowing down, the first sign, most women in this room will probably remember this, the very first sign of getting a little older is starting to get cellulite. It's actually a decrease of testosterone because it increases smooth muscle tension. So the muscles that hold your skin to the fascia beneath that relax, and then they cause little dimples, and that's where it comes from. So that's kind of the first sign. It happens like in the 30s. So menopause is, it's not a switch, right? It's not binary. It takes a long time to really complete menopause. Chronic inflammation, for reasons we've already talked about, lethargy, mental and physical, obviously for reasons we've talked about. Lots of metabolic changes. I've done literally 12-hour lectures on the effects of sleep. I would bore you all to death. You'd hate me, but tons of metabolic changes go on. body composition shifts. Mother Nature's biggest joke on men is that as we get fatter, there's an enzyme in both men and women that convert testosterone into estrogen. The only place that enzyme exists is in men's subcutaneous fat. So the fat you can see, not the fat around your organs, but like the fat under your skin. So the fatter you get, the more aromatase you have. The more aromatase you have, the more of your testosterone that becomes estrogen. To make the joke funnier, the brain doesn't have testosterone receptors. It has estrogen receptors. And so when your estrogen goes high, it goes to your brain, and your brain goes, oh, we have a ton of estrogen. We must not need to make so much testosterone. So your testosterone production goes down. Then your muscles shrink, and you get fatter. And then this is a self-propagating downward spiral. And then eventually, muscles shrink, muscles atrophy, you get fatter, and eventually you get movies. And the man boob has never been pulled off by anyone I've ever seen. He's a cool guy. In my opinion, he's one of the coolest guys, but not even he can pull that off. So we got about 12 minutes to blaze through this stuff. I won't belabor this. I'm happy to talk to you guys about the details of this. I just want to throw it out there so that you can go, oh, wow, I didn't expect that. And think that you got your value of being here. I'm happy to address it in Q&A or when we're out in the hallways or whatever. Like, I don't care. I love to talk about this stuff. I don't know how I became such a nerd. I started off so well. All right, so being awake 17 to 18 hours, a lot of the times we do studies. I have a graph on this where we compare sleep deprivation to intoxication. When you're this sleep deprived, you perform as though you have a blood alcohol of X, right? And we correlate those all the time. So you essentially, if you've been awake for 17 to 18 hours, which is very, very common, right? You've been awake for 18 hours, you're going to get in your car and drive home. You're not legally intoxicated, right, in most states, but you're on the verge. You're impaired, right? You're impaired to some degree. Now, if you add a single drink to this, it doubles the performance metaphor or analogy, right? So if you have a single drink, you go from a 0.5 to a 0.1 in performance. Of course, if you blow into a meter, you're going to be 0.5 because sleep doesn't increase alcohol in your blood, but your performance will decrease to where you will be performing as though you are drunk, right? Like that's really drunk. 0.1 is drunk off a single drink. If the single drink would push you up 0.5, which is the case for most people. 6 hours of decrease, so just sleeping 6 hours, sleeping 2 hours less than you need decreases the libido, that's sex drive, another job security word. Sex drive decreases 30 to 40%. Single night, okay? Also not good for relationships. Sleep deprivation impairs us as long as we do it. I'm going to have a slide to show you that. But the interesting thing is, again, much like alcohol, you go to a bar. You guys look like you go to bars all the time, party. Okay, you go to a bar, bear with me. People go to bars, right? And you guys used to go to bars. You go to bars, you go to happy hour, you have a drink, and you're like, I'm not going to have another drink because I'm going to drive home. And then your friends, especially the guys, like friends, are like, you wuss, whatever. And like, oh yeah, I'll have another drink. And like, I definitely need to wait a few hours now. And then by like your fourth drink, you're like, I'm fine. I can drive home. Right? Same thing happens with sleep deprivation. I'll show you that slide in a minute. All right, that was done in the Barracks study too. So it's only about 2 to 3 days that people realize they're impaired. And then by the fourth day, they're like, I'm normal. I'm totally adjusted to the sleep schedule. Increases daytime hunger by 25%, and primarily for sugars, okay? And I might have time to talk about that in another slide. So get this. So now we're talking 7 hours, not 6. 7 hours of sleep per night if you need 8. 14.3 pounds of fat, all right? It's not muscle, guys. You're not more muscular than you were in your 20s. 14.3 pounds of fat every year you do that, okay? Never ends. Decreases insulin sensitivity. Ken, something that would be near and dear to Ken's heart. This is actually a fantastic study. If you're a geek like me, I'll send you this. I love this study. It's one of the best studies I've ever seen. It's so simple. Insulin sensitivity, by the way, is a very, very, very big deal for every metric of health. Okay. Increases basically inflammation. This is an inflammatory marker. 15 to 30% decrease in executive function, which is exactly what it sounds like, right? Decision making, planning, scheduling, writing, reading, like all the things an executive would do. Now here's that slide I was talking about, and I'm sorry that it's pixelated. I've tried to find better versions of this, but I can't. So this line here, people slept 4 hours a night. This line here, people slept 6 hours a night. Down here, they slept 8 hours a night. We sleep accommodated everybody first. I don't have time to explain what that means, but basically they were all well rested and ready to sleep 8 hours a night. Up here basically is their performance decrement, were they 5% worse, 10% worse, 15% worse, 20% worse, whatever. And then these are the days, right? So the baseline started here. The people who slept 8 hours, stayed down there. Like they had no decline in performance until they get really bored out here at days 13 to 14 hours or whatever. I'm tired of doing the same thing every day. But look at this, that's 6 hours. So right here is the impairment rate. So this would be like a blood alcohol level of 0.08, right? This is where they say you're actually impaired. And what are we? So for we're 5 days in for 6 hours a night, and we're 4 days in for 4 hours a night. Okay, you're running around legally, performing as though you're legally drunk all day, the entire day, right? It just doesn't come and go. It's the whole day. But I think even more interesting, if you take this 6 hours out, which is very common, the reason I chose this one, if you take this 6 hours out to day 7 to 8, you perform as though you've been awake for 24 to 40 hours. Are there any doctors, first responders, shift workers who have done over 24-hour shifts in the room? How well are you performing 36 hours after you've been awake? Basket case, right? I wouldn't even drive my kids at that point. Bad. For some reason, I'd ride my bicycle home through traffic, but it's because I was impaired, right? I was drunk. What do you expect? And then and then you take this out, and this is really crazy because how many people in America sleep 6 hours a night every single night? Lots, right? We just talked about that. That's actually the average. So you take that out to here, and it's you have not slept for 2 days. That's your performance level. And this is at day 12. 12 days in a row of 6 hours of sleep. That's scary? Come on, that's pretty scary. All right, this is a little more of the data of the blood alcohol. I hate it when scientists do this. This is kind of corny. They look at the y-axes are different, okay, right? So this is 1.04 and this is 92, and so the alcohol impairment is more, but they, I guess, wanted to make the lines look very similar. But the important thing is, right here is where we really consider you impaired. You're 8 to 10% worse. So if we look at 92 percentile, it's just right around here. So that's hours of wakefulness is 24 hours. Not that long. Stay up a full night and you're pretty trashed. All right, I won't discuss these. These are basically all the diseases that poor sleep, chronically insufficient, or chaotic sleep lead to. Some really important ones there. Of course, for the military, the TBI and PTSD is a huge piece that I continue to work with the community on. Increased suicide risk of 750%, 7.5 times more likely to commit suicide if you're chronically sleep deprived. Routine illness risk, so flus, colds, coughs, wheezes, that type of stuff, 3.5 times more likely, okay? To me, that's kind of a big deal. That seems like a big deal. That gets in the way of your life. Performance, again, pick anything: speed, strength, balance, agility, endurance, injury risk, increases your risk of addiction to anything. I didn't list all the addictions. And then we already talked about that. We talked about the worsened communication, perceived affection, but of course, due to these two things and due to the mood volatility, spousal abuse, child abuse, divorce all go up. Depression, tenfold increase. Another interesting thing about depression is almost every known mental disorder, so bipolar, schizophrenia, like all of the really major ones, and major depressive episodes. There are a couple of programs now studying something called chronobiology. It's looking very likely that every single one of those breaks, whether it's schizophrenia or falling into depression, is preceded by a period of poor sleep. Which is one of the reasons that the military sleep deprives people when they indoctrinate them. That's true. It's true. Like when I went through Hell Week, we didn't sleep for 5 days straight. And the people that go crazy is like, sorry you went crazy, but you can't be a SEAL, so go over there. And it's a screening process. Social impact. This one should scare you all because if you don't have kids that age, you might have grandkids that age. 4 times more likely to be in a fatal car crash from being tired than being drunk. 4 times. How often do you hear about it? Most people essentially, these are the people that admit to it, so we know it's higher than that, right? Possibly, they only catch people dumb enough to answer polls, so you might be able to lower that. Like maybe it's accurate, but if you might offset each other. 18% of all, so 1 out of every 5 fatal car accidents, that's considered the primary cause of the fatal car accident. 1 out of 5, right? That's huge. 50% of all heavy truck accidents. Anybody surprised by that? Didn't shock me in the least, And it is the most common dominant factor for all airline crashes, but also I think for all transportation, trains and ships as well. Exxon Valdez was all about sleep deprivation. It had nothing to do with the captain drinking, by the way. So let's quickly just buzz through a few of these slides. I'm going to go through these quickly. It's not super significant and not things I really want you guys to remember as much as just to be exposed to. Basically, the point here is that the half-life of caffeine varies greatly. Okay, you can drink 100 milligrams of caffeine. 6 to 9 hours later, you should have 50 milligrams of caffeine still in your circulation. Okay. However, the variation goes up to like 40 hours. So some people can have 100 milligrams of caffeine. They're not going to get down to 50 for 40 hours, all right? This is usually somebody with like fatty liver or some sort of liver dysfunction or enzyme deficiency, but it's very common, okay? So the range is enormous. Decreases the deep sleep we were talking about, decreases how quickly you go to sleep, how frequently you awake, and how sleepy you are. Actually competes with adenosine receptors. Adenosine is what causes sleep pressure. That's what makes us feel sleepy. And that's why coffee works, because it blocks those receptors and we don't feel as sleepy. But that's a major part for the normal physiology to happen. And just because I like stupid trivia, it's the second most traded commodity on the planet, behind oil. All right, so here's why sleep drugs don't work. This is just a region of your brain, right? This is the lizard brain. This is the brain below that neocortex that you think of when you think of a human brain, that little ball underneath there that really nobody ever talks about. You can't see it unless you strip the neocortex away. And this, of course, is not all the regions of the brain. This is what we know so far. If you take all these little regions of the brain, and if you look at the bold letters, that's the abbreviation for that region of the brain. The non-bold letters are all of the neurotransmitters or neuropeptides that change during sleep. And guess what? They don't just change once. Like all of these change for you to fall asleep. Then they all change again to keep you asleep. Then they all change again to wake you up in every single one of these categories. Okay? Now, if you take a sleep drug, almost every sleep drug works on GABA. Well, how many times do you see GABA? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So we're like, okay, 11. GABA is pretty important. That's why they all work on GABA, right? I told you it slows down the neocortex. But what about everything else that's supposed to change? It doesn't change, right? If you're just using the drug to act like GABA. Some work on histamine, that's a wake-promoting neurotransmitter. Some work on serotonin. We alluded to that a little bit. No drug on the market that I'm aware of works on more than one of these processes, okay? It only chooses one out of this entire mess. Ridiculous, right? Way too complex. We'll skip that. So how do you get good sleep? I'm glad you asked. First thing you do is you completely blacken your room. Why? Showed up. What did we start with, right? Ancestors. Sun went down. Can't have a sun in my house and be ready to sleep, right? Got to decrease the amount of light in my eyes. Got to completely blacken my room out like a cave or something, right? Quit using electronics in bed for sure. Like absolutely no electronics in your bed. But also quit using them for quite a while before you go to bed, because they are putting light into your eyes, right? That is affecting your photoperiod. Your bed is actually for sleep and sex only, okay? Clarify, I always get accused of this. I did not say you can't have sex elsewhere. Your bed is for sleep and sex only. That's all I'm saying, okay? Don't bring your notebook to bed. Don't bring your iPad to bed. Make a hard bedtime, stick to it. I recommend setting an alarm clock to get you ready for bed. That's just as important as the alarm clock to get you ready for work or for your day or whatever. Equal, 100% equal, just as important. Get up as close as you can to the same time, go to sleep about the same time, wake up about the same time. Why? Because we're trying to chase the sun, right? The sun doesn't change that much. We shouldn't change that much. Learn 5 ways to decrease stress. The reason for that is that neocortex part I told you about. You have to decrease your interaction with the environment. So let's say you do everything right, you use some gadgets, you dim your lights, you use candles, you get rid of all the blue light in your eyes. You have a program on your computer to get all the blue light out of your computer, and then you sit at your computer like this, and you're like watching one more cat video or one more email or whatever it is you're doing, and then at 9:59 you're like, oh, time to go to bed, and you get in bed, and you're like, what's going on? Like 9:15, 9:20. Well, duh. I mean, your brain is still completely awake. All of that, barrier between you and your environment is not there. You've skipped that part. That's a very important part. Improve insulin sensitivity via diet. That's just basically getting rid of refined carbohydrates, primarily all the white powders, flour, sugar, cocaine. Exercise daily does lots of great things, but it also increases adenosine, which I told you is sleep pressure. Right? And it increases insulin sensitivity, which we like. Decrease the blue light in front of bedtime by 3 hours optimally. Not realistic for everybody. I'll give you some tricks on how to do that. That's self-promoting. I'm not going to talk about that. If you snore loudly, get a sleep study. You could have obstructive sleep apnea, which is a totally different gig, and there's all sorts of things that need to be done. Again, that's self-promoting. I have a product that basically just does the whole pathway that we talked about when we talked about the turkey. Just puts all those nutrients in there. But these glasses here, these are shooting glasses. You can also buy gaming glasses. They have an argon coating on them. They have fairly clear lenses. They're usually slightly orange or slightly yellow. They block blue light. You have these on, it's just like there's no light. I could be staring at these lights with those on, and I'm not getting blue light in my eyes, okay? This is a program you can put on your computer. You can't put that on your television, so if you're going to watch television, you need those. If you're going to be using a computer, you can put this in there. You program it to where you live. When the sun goes down, it takes all the blue light out of your computer. When the sun comes back up, it puts the blue light back in your computer. This is one of the ways to relax. The headphones, you can use a meditative software in them. Various ways of doing that. I encourage people to track their sleep. Some people are really gadget oriented. Usually people younger than me, like the millennial crowd, is really gadget oriented and they want high tech ways. You can do this with a piece of paper. Like, what time did I go to bed? What time did I wake up? Right? Like, it's not. Now, for a lot of people who say, you don't know what my bedroom looks like, my windows, the skylights, I have all this stuff, and it's really, it'd be ridiculous to buy this and that. And I'm not 100% convinced that you're right. Anyways, Kirk, so I'm not going to go out and buy a bunch of blackout curtains. So I sell these two right here for $199.95. You can do it in three installments, and if you need more than one, we can talk about a volume discount. If you're traveling, if you're on a plane, if you're in a car, if you're in a hotel that's maybe not a 5-star hotel and doesn't have blackout curtains, this is the next best thing. There's some possibility that light on your skin actually affects sleep, but let's not go there. And then the earplugs will actually decrease the awareness, raise the barrier, right? So here's some resources. Take a Nap. Great book, this thin, has a little spinny wheel on the front. It's really cool. You can calculate if I want to improve my cognition, my creativity, or my athletic performance, and I woke up at this time, what time should I take a nap and how long should I take it for? Really cool. I use it with all shift workers. My website has information growing every day. Fatigue Science is a great, and you guys I think are going to get this lecture, so don't worry about writing all this stuff down. FatigueScience.com, they have a lot of statistics, a lot of those things I was telling you about, accident rates and all that stuff. RobWolf.com, a good buddy of mine, just had a book come out yesterday. It's about nutrition, but there's a big sleep chapter that one of his friends helped him write. And then here are my favorite sleep books. Again, that's the Take the Nap one. This is William Dement, I told you. This is the chronotherapy I was talking about with mood disorders, association with sleep. And this is basically about diet and sleep, that book. So they're all good books. And then you can contact me at my website, or you can just put my name in Google and you'll be able to find me. I ran a little long, I'm sorry. But if you guys will stay, I'll stay. We're going to get some questions out.
You talked about the minimums for sleep. What about if you sleep more than the recommended 9 hours? Any detriment to that? And also, would you comment on President Trump's allegedly sleeping 4 hours a night?
Without getting into any political rhetoric, I would say there's a chance that Donald Trump was speaking hyperbolically. There are no research studies so far, like clinical, and like when we're actually observing people sleep. These outliers that only need 3 to 4 hours of sleep so far do not exist. There is a group that has a genetic mutation that they call super sleepers. All it does is it slows down the rate in which they break. They don't break as fast with sleep deprivation, but they all still perform optimally on the same sleep as everybody else. Just not as impactful for them. And your first question was?
Any detriment to going past?
No, so unless there's a sudden shift in how much you need to sleep. So like your whole life, you've been a 7.5 hour guy, and then over the period of 6 months, you need 9.5 hours every day. I'd go get checked out for something else. There's some sort of metabolic thing. But if you've always been a 9 hour sleeper and you're still a 9 hour sleeper, keep going. I'm a 9 hour sleeper. You, sir.
Does body position or neck, head position make a difference? And is there a pillow recommended or anything like that?
So, in full disclosure, no, I don't actually recommend any specific pillow. The body position does matter. It matters for two reasons. If you sleep on your back, what causes snoring is the collapse of these muscles, right? The oropharyngeal pathway or oropharyngeal passage, what we talk about. Those smooth muscles can collapse, and then when they're collapsed, they're like this, and you have to get air past them, so they do that, and that's what snoring is, okay? So if you snore really loudly on your back, don't sleep on your back. That's super easy to solve. If you love to sleep on your back, you always sleep on your back, you get a Hanes t-shirt with a pocket here, you cut that off, you put it right between your shoulder blades, put a tennis ball in there and sew it back on. Wear that t-shirt to bed for 30 days, you won't sleep on your back anymore. The ideal sleeping position to decrease strain on your low back and your hips and your neck is what they call a semi-supine. So it's basically like your trunk is laying fairly flat, like almost on your stomach, but a little on the side, and your legs are spread out a little bit, right? Like an army man crawl, like a little bit of scissor kick, like that position. That's considered to be orthopedically the best position to sleep. But the truth is, whatever position you get the best sleep in, do that. This lady here in the turquoise, please.
Thank you. I wake up in stage 1, early stage 2, major craving sugar.
So that's what I didn't really have time to get into, is the metabolic changes. But insulin sensitivity, obviously, one of the thousands of things that it controls is your average blood glucose, right? You have regions in your brain, and particularly this prefrontal cortex that we talked about, the executive functioning that I was talking about, and I call it or Anthony Sapolsky, I stole it from him, calls it the simulator. You can make an assessment. If I do this is the most likely outcome. That's what this region of the brain does. So it has a lot to do with alertness and decision making and how active your mind is. That is the first area that gets notified when blood glucose starts dropping. Okay, it doesn't matter how high the blood glucose is. What matters is how rapidly it's changing. You could be diabetic and have a glucose of 400, but if it goes down to 300 over 30 minutes, your brain goes, "Oops, we better wake up." This is how every other animal on the planet, this is the only time that any other animal on the planet sleep deprives themselves, is when they're starving. Their brain perceives this big drop in blood glucose and they say, oh, we obviously are in starvation, so we need to get up earlier so that we can go further during the day and forage for more food, and we're going to shut this area off so you'll try more novel stuff. So that's what's happening. We know that as insulin sensitivity decreases and blood glucose fluctuates more, people have a really hard time staying asleep, and they wake up with cravings.
Time for 2 more questions.
All right, we have 2 more hands, so we'll go this lady in the bluish purple. I'm color weak, and then gentleman over here.
Can you catch up on sleep?
Man, I hate it when people ask me that one. In sleep medicine, there's a phrase called sleep debt. And the metaphor we always give that's very, very, very accurate is credit card debt. The one thing that we don't know, a lot like a credit card, is how long is it actually going to take us to pay that off, right? So if you say you need 8 hours of sleep every night, and you work during the week and you sleep 6 hours every night when you're working, and then on the weekend you sleep 8 hours a night, right? You didn't actually really catch up, right? You're still 5 days deprived, so you've put that on your credit card. If you sleep 10 hours, you've paid back 2 of those 5 nights, right? If you sleep 14 hours, then you've paid back the week. We don't know how long sleep debt lasts, though. There's a question out there: if I sleep deprived myself in college for 4 years, and I'm now 40 years old, and I've never gone through a protracted period of sleeping as much as I wanted to sleep, do I still carry a sleep debt? And actually, we think you do. We actually think that you do. So what I didn't get to is in all those trials where we're measuring people's performance, what we do first is we sleep adapt them. So we put them in a cold, dark room that has nothing but a bed and a toilet in it. Literally, that's it, right? Bed and a toilet. They go in there for 14 hours a day, and then they come out for 10 hours a day and do whatever they want, but then they have to go back for 14 hours a day. Of course, they get paid to do this. The average person sleeps 12 and a half hours when you start this. And then over the course of 4 to 6 weeks, that will dwindle down to 7.5 hours, plus or minus half an hour, for almost everybody we've ever studied. And that's where that number comes from for how much an adult needs to sleep. So if you do that, you can pay back your sleep debt in 4 to 6 weeks. But short of that, I don't really know how long it takes. There's a gentleman back here in the black T-shirt.
You mentioned insulin sensitivity and sleep deprivation. There's some study or resource that we might find interesting to look at. Is that something you could
I will give it to Ken, and he can pass along in the newsletter or email or however he wants to do it. It's a fantastic study. Like it's so simplistic. It's just really it's like 2 pages, and it's solid. So solid.
Thank you.
Okay.
On that note, let's thank our speaker.